So I'm here with Tom Philpott. Tom's the food and agriculture writer at Mother Jones magazine, and want to talk a little bit today about the state of organics in America, and particularly, does it promote sustainability and does it promote food justice? And I met Tom at a talk he was moderating in New York back in October, where he kind of brought up these issues about food justice and about how organic food has become the providence of the elites. And you made a really compelling introduction at that talk. So I want to kind of get us started by reviewing what you talked about there.
Okay. Honestly, I'm having trouble remembering exactly what I talked about there, but I believe it was something along the lines of looking at what has become of organic, sort of taking a step back and looking at what's become of it. And I think it's the thing about organic is that basically at its fundamental level, it's a critique of industrial agriculture. It grew out of being a critique of industrial agriculture, and what it says is that that basically it's just a few principles. That nutrients need to be recycled. That biodiversity is a powerful way to sort of balance pest infestations and weeds. That you can get great abundance through biodiversity and sort of recycling nutrients back into soil. The fundamental thing about industrial agriculture, or the sort of fundamental tenet, is the law of return. What's taken from the soil must be brought back. Also, organic matter and humic matter in soil is the key metric of the health of a food system, and the sort of foundation of organic agriculture, the way we define the term, sort of the modern use of it, comes in the 40s as a reaction against this move towards chemical ag. And what it's become, the way it's evolved over the years, is not so much a move to overthrow industrial ag, but a niche that has taken root within industrial ag. And basically, as most people know by now, the sort of small, innovative organic food companies have by and large been bought by the big food players. And you get a lot of what we call input substitution in organic. So instead of you're doing a similar style in large scale organic agriculture, you're doing a similar style of sort of mining the soil of nutrients and putting in sort of industrial fertilizers. But instead of it, the fertilizer just becomes chicken manure from a factory. CAFO, a factory chicken farm, instead of straight nitrogen, and you're using sort of non-synthetic pesticides in place of synthetic pesticides. So you're really sort of instead of industrial agriculture being overthrown by organic, it's becoming the model for organic. And so on a sort of agroecological level, I feel like we've stalled in the organic movement. And then, even sort of conventional organic, the sort of Whole Foods or Trader Joe's, certified organic, it's doing some good things. It's taking some terrible chemicals out of the food system and exposing farm workers to fewer of those. And it's probably more nutritious in some ways because the plants have to work a little harder. And when plants have to work a little harder, they develop more phytonutrients. And more phytonutrients is better for us. We're sort of these chemicals that plants develop to defend themselves end up being important human nutrients. But that food, it ends up being something that is not for everyone. It's in these, it's more expensive, and when you have a situation where people are struggling, you've got stagnant incomes and people working ever longer hours, then it becomes it's not accessible to those people. And so, I feel like organic has gotten stalled in a very kind of stagnant corner.
Right. A couple of things that I think I'd like to get your input on. One is the sustainability question, and we know that the USDA dietary guidelines were just published, and their own panel recommended sustainability as a cornerstone of any recommendations. Of course, that was kind of eliminated because of big meat and all kinds of other big food interests.
Sure.
But it also kind of brings into the question about how do we really discern, what is sustainable. For instance, the whole issue that you covered in your current piece in Mother Jones about in Oregon what's going on with the cattle with grazing on federal lands.
Yeah.
And you brought up some interesting points that people should. I'll actually link to it when I put the post up. That people weren't getting at, and clearly the protesters aren't even aware of those points that they should be protesting. The other side of it is Grist published a piece this week about grazing on federal lands and linked it to climate change with the idea is that, grazing in general, livestock grazing, is, the big driver of climate change. And, somewhere there's truth and somewhere there's ideology in all this. And anybody who knows anything about agriculture knows that livestock is essential to a healthy agricultural system. So what happens when you have all these variant voices coming in, and whether or not people are conscious ideologues about a position, they end up promoting an ideological position anyway?
Yeah, I mean, lots going on in that question, and I think one of the main things is that when you look at something like, of course, sustainability is a very freighted phrase and brings up the question, sustainable for whom, and all of that. But in looking at it in ecological terms, one thing about it is that you can't make a blanket statement about grazing. You can't say grazing leads to climate change or grazing is crucial to sustainable farming, because every ecology, every sort of microclimate and sort of, we can say, food shed is going to have different conditions. And in some conditions, intensive grazing actually works really well. In other conditions, when lands are really ecologically fragile, maybe grazing has less of a place or possibly no place. And I think that's one of the things that happens in our conversations is that people make blanket statements. Now, there is a place that could handle and do very well with a lot more grazing, and that is the Corn Belt, basically the center of the country around Illinois, Iowa, Nebraska, in that part of the country where is now under a massive let's call it a duo crop of corn and soybeans. Tens of millions of acres of these crops over gigantic swaths of land are in these two crops. And if you rotated in cows, say you had another rotation of some kind of small grains, like oats or something like that, and then you added a rotation of cows, where cows come through every fourth year, you would have a much more sustainable system. You'd be building soil in that land. That store of topsoil, which is still one of the greatest reserves of topsoil in the world, was created by grazing. And taking grazing off that land has been a disaster for the soil. In the very fragile lands of the West, I think it's pretty obvious that grazing has a role, but it's got to be very, very well managed. And the incentives in the marketplace, I was trying to get at in my piece, the incentives in the marketplace lead to overgrazing, because in that part of the world, I actually had a paragraph in there that the editor took out about that with beef prices being so low and cattle prices being so low because of the control of these giant meat packers, that the way you respond to low prices is to put more cattle on the land. And clearly, if those ranchers in the West had their way and they were able to have unfettered grazing, because of low prices, they would probably overgraze the land into a desert, which is what happened in the 30s. And so, bottom line, different grazing regimes for different places make sense.
Right. Well, one of the things that the grist piece was getting at was that the methane that's produced particularly by cattle that graze by belching and whatever that they produce, and that's a big driver. So either that is or that isn't. The point I'm getting at as well is that you can't demand that the science be rigorous on climate change and then pick and choose what you want to be true in other areas.
Yeah. But yeah, and the methane point is important, but the thing about it is that grazing can do something. It doesn't always do it, but it can do something that balances out that methane, and that is that it's capable of storing carbon. It's capable of making soil into a very effective carbon sink. This is what happened in the Corn Belt over history, when you had large ruminants grazing over centuries and centuries and millennia. You had massive amounts of carbon stored in soil. That's what that huge store of topsoil is, and that can balance out the methane. However, if you're overgrazing, you're not storing carbon in topsoil, and you're also producing methane, and so it becomes a massive climate change disaster. And that's what we've seen in the past in the West when grazing was completely unregulated.
If we're looking at the certified organic now, for the sustainability question, one of the things that I noticed, and it's become my pet peeve, is that when I go into Whole Foods store to buy, say, sweet peppers, organic sweet peppers, they're all imported from Holland, and they're all $5.99 a pound. It seems wherever I go in the country at Whole Foods, they're $5.99 a pound for certified organic imported sweet peppers. There's a local farm near us that's been a family farm here since the 50s. They've got a farm store. They grow what they call sustainably. Which they have a whole statement about that, which they invite little trips of school kids out to pick and farm in their field. So I really don't think that they're being misleading about that. I think that they are farming pretty cleanly. I've been buying sweet peppers there for 69 cents a pound.
Right.
Okay, so this is really a 15-minute drive from here. So the climate footprint compared to what it takes for me to drive over, get something local, probably pick that day or that week, compared to a certified organic option. I don't seem to have a certified organic option within the industrial organic model that is not imported. It's not like peppers can't be grown in this country, but the supply chain is just, it says something where at that point, should certified organic take the sustainability of the carbon footprint into account?
Well, I think so, probably. It doesn't, but the label can only do so much. But one of the things going on there, I think, is that this expectation of that seasons don't exist anymore. Because at least in most places, I think Florida is a little different because of the sort of warm climate more or less year round. But in most places, there's a season where you can grow peppers and a season where you can't grow peppers. And getting sort of red sweet peppers is kind of tricky. It's kind of a long season crop. And so if we think of them as this treat, for most of the country that comes in, maybe in August or September, and that we enjoy them at that time, and then when that time passes, we turn to something else that the land is producing, then this idea of peppers trucked in from Holland or shipped in from Holland doesn't exist. But when you have access to peppers from Holland or Chile or wherever, then this idea of seasonality goes out the picture, and consumers just demand it year-round. And the sort of niche that local farms can fill goes away. Just this past summer, I was in Pennsylvania in August, and in the Northeast, August is like this incredible time for farms, incredibly abundant. And I was actually on a farm that was just cranking out all this amazing produce.
Wait, come back into the picture. We lost half your head. There you are. Okay.
Yeah, and I went to a grocery store in the area. This is in rural Pennsylvania, and the produce in the grocery store was all California stuff. And so here we are in the middle of the growing season, vegetables coming off, and probably farms in the area producing for farmers markets, mostly in Philadelphia and New York City, and the grocery store has got California stuff. And it's just, I'm assuming it's just because that supply chain is really easy for these big chains to tap into, and it's less trouble to deal with the sort of year-round stream from California than it is to go to local farms. But it just struck me, just how removed this country is from local supply patterns, unless you're going out of your way to shop at a farmer's market, and mostly in a rural area.
Yeah. Well, this is something that our friend Joan Gussow gets at all the time when she says, grow your own food. The whole idea that, it's just an abstract conversation. Well, even the way we talk about it, unless people have ever had access to a farm or to the experience of picking or growing, it all just becomes an abstract conversation. And I think it's just one of the casualties of our life just being so distanced from agriculture that we just don't know. We hear people say things about seasonality, and unless people are curious enough to look into what that means, it just doesn't mean anything. And all this, whatever we're talking about, unless people actually made a connection and found a local farm or joined a CSA, a community-supported farm, it doesn't become real for people. And I think that's a big impediment.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's why someone like Joan and a lot of other people are, very, very sensibly, I think, pushing really hard for school education, for curriculum around gardening and cooking in schools, because, we are several generations removed from that kind of seasonality now. Like, people don't have, people's parents didn't have it. And sometimes people's grandparents didn't have it. So we've got a multi-generational rift here. And, I think that over and over again, it's been proven, stuff like the Edible Schoolyard program in Berkeley, which has gone national in some sense, that when you expose kids to this, it piques their interest and gets them interested in trying new things. And the sort of magic of sticking this unimpressive little speck into the ground and a plant coming out of it captures their imagination. So yeah, absolutely, I think that those kinds of efforts are critical to any kind of real food reform in this country.
It's funny you say that, because I did a video recently of Joan talking about her class at Columbia coming out to her garden in her backyard, and totally nonplussed when they saw a sweet potato coming out of her garden. They were more interested in looking at their smartphones. And she actually went on a bit of a rant about that, justifiably, saying, how do we escape this madness? Then when people don't see the growing of food as a miracle anymore.
Yeah. But I think they do if they're involved with it in a meaningful way. If, I'm someone who came up without a very strong, in family memory, there's no farming. I think I had a grandfather in the suburbs of Chicago who would grow tomatoes a little bit, and that was just like this little side project he did. And that's all the food growing I can remember. But getting into food through kind of an obsession with flavor and kind of revolt against this sort of flavorless American food in the 80s and 90s got me into thinking about, okay, why is it that our food sucks so bad and is so devoid of flavor? And that led me into thinking about farming and growing food myself. And I spent some years farming in North Carolina. And, one of the things that I'll never forget, and I think a lot of people, sort of urban types who go to farming, move into farming, talk about, is just the insane magic of harvesting potatoes with a pitchfork. Because you put in, when you plant potatoes, you put in this sort of unimpressive, half, not rotten, but very unappetizing chunk of tomato into the ground. And it's hard to believe that very much can come from it. You need these big, lush green plants, and then the plants die, and you go out there with a bunch of people in buckets and pitchforks and plunge the pitchfork into the soil and turn it over, and then there's this bounty of beautiful potatoes that's sort of bouncing out of the ground, and it's completely magical. And I think if more people were exposed to experiences like that, I think we would sort of remystify food production a little bit more, and it would be a good thing.
Yeah. You talked a little bit about this before, and the concept of what's been known as organic junk food, certified organic junk food, is the bounty of you walk into Whole Foods or Trader Joe's, and the packaged foods it's off literally on the shelf and off the shelf.
Yeah.
And going back to something that Joan had given me when she was on the Organic Standards Board, actually trying to determine the sort of structure of the Organic Act back in the 90s, she wrote a paper called "Can an Organic Twinkie Be Certified?"
Right.
And she was actually, shocked to find out that was actually the goal of this whole thing, to create just a secondary food channel where you can have an organic Twinkie or organic sugar frosted flake, and basically it's what they've gotten.
Yeah.
And we talked about this in New York, is that, in a way, if the average consumer is being hoodwinked by big food, the sort of yuppie consumer is being doubly hoodwinked, because the same companies now are selling them the same packaged crap at probably 5 times the markup.
Right, with this health halo over it. Because if I buy, if I'm going to buy, I like potato chips, right? And so, but I know that when I buy potato chips, that I'm eating something that is really calorie dense, that is, full of calories and not very much nutrition. And so, I try to limit I don't buy a bag of potato chips and keep it in my pantry. I try to sort of ration it to myself by only buying a small bag and only every once in a while when I'm really, really craving it. But, that kind of consciousness gets stripped away if you can slap the word organic on a bag of potato chips, it might be a little bit less, unhealthy for you, but fundamentally, you're still eating a very high-calorie, low-nutrient food, and if you let that organic label hoodwink you, bamboozle you into thinking that you're doing something virtuous for yourself, then you can be getting plenty of empty calories, just like you are in the regular food chain. And I think there's tons and tons of sweet, heavily sugared stuff that can have an organic label on it. And, it turns out that when something is really sweet, that means that it's extremely calorie dense. It's delivering this very easily digestible, sort of bombard your endocrine system with sugar. And it doesn't matter if it's from, 100% organic cane syrup or high fructose corn syrup. There might be some differences at the margin. But generally, you're getting this wallop of sweetness that your body's having to deal with. And, it puts a halo onto something that we should think of as this indulgence, this thing that we do every once in a while when we're really craving it, not something that we, eat as a staple. And, the food industry, whether it's an organic packaged goods company or, Heinz or whatever, they're trying to sell you more food, and they're trying to sell you more product. And so they're both sort of in the same business.
Yeah. When you get onto the sweets, I mean, it gets into something which is really a pet peeve of mine now, which is the sweetened bottled drinks and canned drinks you'll find in Whole Food stores. And you find whole aisles of these things. And on so many levels, I mean, the nutritional basis that you talked about, the sustainability one about shipping all this really heavy liquid, cases of it. You walk into stores and they're like floor to ceiling of cases of juice and soda and the sugar sweetened stuff.
And even tea, sweet.
And yeah, sweet tea. But not only from the big producers. You see small producers, and not only just doing greenwashing, to the point where I'm calling it like spiritual greenwashing, where you go to the ethos, on their websites, and they talk about, oh, we have these programs where we take care of the farmer here, and we do all this and we do all that, and basically you're selling soda to people, to kids.
Yeah. Yeah, and maybe it says in the label from 100% organic sugar, but and maybe possibly there is a little bit less sugar in it than a regular Coca-Cola, but in general you're putting a halo on something that isn't good for anyone in any way. You're exactly right. I mean, there's nothing more ridiculous than soda. Soda is water that has been artificially blackened and sweetened and stuck in a container, and there's nothing redeeming about it, and making it organic doesn't cut it.
Yeah. So in the end, what's a consumer or a consumer activist to do? Do we trust the USDA label? Do we get behind some sort of sustainable movement, which is also pretty active out there? Or third-party certificate. Before the USDA Act came along, there were other organic certifying bodies out there which were pretty trustworthy.
Yeah. Well, here is one thing that I think people should think about before we get on to the second part of the question about should we get on to another thing besides organic. My fundamental problem with organic right now is that organic has reached a market share somewhere approaching 10%. So somewhere after years and years and years of growth, it's approaching something like 10%. And that's great. It's a great achievement of the organic movement. It's a great achievement of these companies that, we're just questioning some of what that achievement means, but it represents a bunch of chemicals being taken out of the food chain. It represents a desire for people that's sort of, still growing 10% a year. Demand for organic food represents a desire for people to eat something better, a desire for people to ask questions about where their food comes from, and that's great. But what has not kept pace with our demand for organic is organic acres in the United States under cultivation has stagnated at a very, very low level, and it's way below the level of the food share in the marketplace. And what that means is that we're importing a lot of organic food, that we're relying on a lot of other countries to have organic acres under cultivation. And, that's also kind of weird because you got places in Mexico or Chile or, going into the European market in Africa that are these sort of plantations that are certified organic, but it's not for the people that live there. It's for the people in these rich Western nations, not benefiting people very much down there because they're low-wage farm, sort of plantation farm labor, and you're getting this increasing market share, but you're not getting very much impact. One of the mysteries right now is that the certified organic land in the Midwest, this growing region that I've been talking about, that is such a rich sort of topsoil, that we're losing that topsoil. We're hemorrhaging topsoil. It could use organic agriculture. It could use sort of crop diversity and the sort of biodiversity principles of agriculture would go a long way there, and it's getting almost no traction. And so I think one of the questions is, how can we move the needle on organic land under cultivation here in the United States? Why are we stuck? Why isn't it growing more? And why are we relying so much more on exports? And then, in terms of the second question, I think that I think the organic label still says a lot. It's still telling us that there was no antibiotics in the meat, in meat production. There was no synthetic pesticides or fertilizers in it. And so it's worth keeping, but a label doesn't do everything for you. And I think, I would I'd probably be echoing Joan Diagussau in this, in that in addition, sort of use it as a secondary thing, but still figure out what your food shed is, what it is able to produce, what farmers in your food shed. And the food shed, think of it like the watershed. You know, you live in an area and you're getting your water from a certain set of sources, and that same area, food sheds could be sort of pasted on top of watersheds. What can your area produce? What do the farmers need there? Where do they sell their goods? Learn to support your food shed and make that your driving principle, and then use organic as a secondary thing, that if you really need something that doesn't come from there, or your food shed doesn't produce something fundamental to your diet, then try to look at organic. But be thinking about sort of ag policy reform, because our current policies in this country are completely anti-organic. They're driving farmers to monocrops, to chemicals, etc. And we could use the organic principles applied to farmland here a lot more. And when you buy a bunch of organic stuff from Whole Foods, so far you're not contributing to an expansion of organic acres.
Great. Well, thanks so much. This was great. I hope we can do it again. I'm going to make sure to link to your piece and your byline in Mother Jones so people can get more familiar with your column, which is weekly, your column, right?
Yeah, a couple times a week I come out with something.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll make sure people know where to go. And thanks so much. Appreciate it, Tom.
All right, thanks for having me.
Okay, bye-bye.